The cantina on Omega Station buzzed with noise from dozens of different species. Traders, mercenaries, and travelers from across the galaxy filled the large room. The air was thick with smoke from various alien substances, and the smell of exotic foods mixed together in an odd but familiar way. Commander Jake Morrison sat alone at a corner table. His weathered face showed the signs of many years in space. Gray touched his brown hair at the temples and small scars marked his hands. He wore a simple black jacket over dark pants, nothing fancy or military-looking. To most aliens in the room, he looked like just another human trader or pilot. Jake sipped his whiskey slowly and watched the crowd. He had been on Omega Station for 3 days, waiting for his cargo to be processed. The station served as neutral ground where all species could trade and do business. It was one of the few places in the galaxy where natural enemies sat at the same tables. At a large table near the center of the room, a group had gathered around someone telling stories. The storyteller was impossible to miss. Vexthor stood nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales covering his body. His species, the Krillians, were known throughout the galaxy as natural hunters. Sharp teeth filled his mouth, and his yellow eyes could track the smallest movement. Powerful muscles showed under his scaled skin, and his clawed hands moved as he spoke. "The Zephyrian tried to hide in its crystal caves," Vexthor said, his voice carrying across the cantina. "The fool thought the acid rain would keep me away, but I tracked it for 6 days through that poisonous storm." The aliens around his table listened with wide eyes. Some looked impressed, others seemed scared. A few moved their chairs back slightly, as if being too close to the hunter might be dangerous. Vexthor pulled out a small device and activated it. A hologram appeared above the table, showing what looked like a crystal statue of a humanoid figure. But Jake could see it was not art, it was a trophy. The Zephyrian had been turned to crystal by its own world's acid rain, probably while trying to escape. "Beautiful work," said a trader with blue skin and 4 arms. "How many Deathworlders have you taken?" Vexthor smiled, showing all his sharp teeth. 47 confirmed kills.
Each one from a different death world.
Each one more dangerous than the last. He changed the hologram to show different trophies. There was the skull of something with too many teeth, the carapace of a bug-like creature the size of a person, and stranger things that Jake could not identify. "The Helix warriors were my favorite," Vexthor continued. 6 arms, each one strong enough to crush steel. They live on a world where the volcanoes never stop erupting. The heat would cook most species in minutes. A small, furry alien at the edge of the group spoke up. "How do you do it? How do you hunt such dangerous creatures?" Vexthor laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "Planning. Patience. And understanding that Deathworlders are just animals with good reflexes. They survive on their worlds because they have to, but take them away from home and they are nothing special." The group nodded along with his words. Jake noticed that several other tables had gone quiet, their occupants listening to the hunters' tales. "My people have been hunting Deathworlders for over 1,000 years, Vexthor said. "We study them, learn their weaknesses, then strike. The key is not to fear them. Fear makes you stupid, and stupid hunters become trophies themselves." He gestured to his collection again. Each of these creatures was the apex predator on its homeworld, the thing everything else ran from. But here they are, part of my collection, because being dangerous on your own world does not make you smart. The crowd around him grew larger as word spread through the cantina. Even species that normally avoided Krillians came to listen. Vexthor was clearly enjoying the attention. "The worst death world I ever hunted on had gravity 3 times normal," he said. "The storms could strip flesh from bone and the local predators had acid for blood. I spent 2 months tracking my prey through that hell." He activated another hologram, this one showing a massive creature with multiple heads and armor-like skin. But in the end, it died, just like all the rest. One clean shot through the brain. All that evolution, all that adaptation to survive on a nightmare world. And it could not adapt to a plasma rifle. The aliens around the table made impressed sounds. Some asked questions about his techniques. Others wanted to see more trophies. Vexthor was happy to oblige, telling story after story of his hunts. Jake continued to sip his drink and listen. The hunter was good at telling stories, he had to admit. And from what Jake could see, the trophies were real. This was not some fake trying to impress people in a bar. Vexthor really had hunted and killed dangerous creatures from across the galaxy. "The thing about Deathworlders," Vexthor said, his voice getting louder, is that they think surviving their homeworld makes them special. They develop pride, thinking they are the toughest things in the galaxy. His yellow eyes scanned the room as he spoke, and Jake noticed them pause on him for a moment before moving on. But survival is not the same as intelligence. Most Deathworlders are just clever animals. They have good instincts, quick reflexes, maybe some natural weapons, but they lack the higher thinking needed to be true predators. Several aliens in the crowd nodded along. The idea seemed to comfort them, that the scary creatures from dangerous worlds were not as smart as civilized species. Take humans, for example, Vexthor said, and Jake felt every eye in the cantina turn toward him. They come from what the Galactic Survey calls a garden world. Pleasant climate, reasonable gravity, plenty of water and food, yet somehow they get classified as Deathworlders. The hunter laughed again. I have studied their world. Earth is a paradise compared to real Deathworlds. No acid rain, no crushing gravity, no storms that last for years. They just had some large animals and weather patterns. Nothing compared to what real hunters face. Jake felt the attention of the room on him but kept his expression neutral. He took another sip of his whiskey and continued to listen. Humans think they are dangerous because they had to compete with each other. Vexthor continued. But that just proves my point. Real Deathworlders fight their environment every day. Humans only had to worry about other humans. The crowd was eating up every word. Jake could see some of them looking at him with less fear now, as if the hunter had explained away something that had worried them. Jake set down his empty glass with a soft click that somehow carried across the noisy cantina. The sound made several aliens turn to look at him. He stood up slowly, his movements calm and unhurried. There was nothing threatening about the way he moved, but something made the nearby tables go quiet. He walked toward Vexthor's group with an easy stride, hands at his sides, a slight smile on his face. But as he approached, Jake noticed how the other aliens started shifting in their seats. Some moved their chairs back. Others found reasons to look elsewhere. A few actually got up and moved to different tables. Impressive collection, Jake said when he reached the group. His voice was friendly, conversational. He extended his hand toward Vexthor in what appeared to be a standard greeting gesture. The Krillian hunter looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out with one clawed finger to barely touch Jake's palm. It was not quite a handshake, more like he was testing whether the human might be dangerous to touch. Thank you, Vexthor said, his voice carrying less warmth than before. I have worked many years to gather these trophies. Jake nodded and looked at the holographic display still floating above the table. The images of dead creatures rotated slowly in the air between them. Each one had been a living being once, now reduced to a trophy in a collection. 47 different species, Jake said, studying the holograms. That is quite an accomplishment. I imagine each hunt taught you something new about what makes a creature dangerous. Vexthor's chest puffed out with pride. Indeed, every Deathworlder has different adaptations, different survival methods. Learning to counter each one is what separates a true hunter from a lucky amateur. Makes sense, Jake agreed. He pulled out an empty chair from a nearby table and sat down without being invited. Several aliens in the group looked uncomfortable, but no one objected. I am curious about something, though. The hunter gestured for him to continue, clearly enjoying having someone show interest in his expertise. In all your hunts, all these different species from dangerous worlds, Jake said, his tone still casual and friendly. Have you ever encountered a human? Vexthor made a sound that might have been laughter. Humans are barely considered Deathworlders by galactic standards. Your world is classified as a garden planet in our databases. Pleasant weather, comfortable gravity, abundant resources. Hardly the stuff of legendary hunts. A few of the aliens around the table made agreeing sounds. One of them, a traitor with tentacles instead of arms, spoke up. I have been to Earth, very nice world. Green plants everywhere, blue skies, calm oceans. Nothing like the acid storms of Zephyr Prime or the lava fields of Helix. Jake nodded thoughtfully as if considering this point. That is interesting. So you judge the danger of a species by the hostility of their homeworld? Of course, Vexthor said. The environment shapes the predator. Harsh worlds create tough survivors. Easy worlds create soft prey. That makes sense on the surface, Jake said. He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed and thoughtful. But tell me something, Vexthor. What do you think actually makes a Deathworlder dangerous? Is it the world that creates the hunter or the hunter that survives the world? The question hung in the air for a moment. Several aliens around the table looked confused. as if they did not understand the difference. But Vexthor's eyes narrowed slightly. He was smart enough to sense that there was more to the question than it appeared. "The world creates the hunter," Vexthor said after a pause. "Harsh environments force adaptation. Species either develop the tools to survive or they die out. Simple evolution." Jake smiled, but something about the expression made the tentacled traitor shift uncomfortably in his seat. "You see, that is where I think you might be looking at this the wrong way." The cantina around them had grown quieter. Not silent, but the background noise had dropped enough that conversations at nearby tables were easier to overhear. Jake's voice remained conversational, but it carried just far enough that others could listen if they chose to. "You have been thinking about deathworlders as products of their environment," Jake continued. "Creatures shaped by hostile worlds into efficient killing machines. And that is true for most of the species in your collection." He gestured toward the holographic trophies still rotating above the table. The Zephyrians evolved crystal skin to protect against acid rain. The Helix warriors developed multiple arms and heat resistance for their volcanic world. Each species you hunted adapted to survive their specific environment. Vexthor nodded along, not sure where this was leading but interested despite himself. "But here's the thing about humans," Jake said, and his tone remained friendly even as something cold entered his eyes. "We did not just adapt to survive our world. We adapted to conquer it." The words seemed simple enough, but they made several aliens around the table look uneasy. The tentacled traitor moved his chair back slightly, though he probably did not realize he was doing it. "Earth might look peaceful to a visitor," Jake continued, "but that is because humans spent thousands of years making it that way. We did not evolve to hide from our environment or simply endure it. We evolved to change it, control it, and eventually master it completely." Vexthor's clawed hands rested on the table, and Jake noticed the hunter's muscles were slightly tense now, as if he was unconsciously preparing for some kind of threat. "Every other species you have hunted learned to survive their world," Jake said, his voice still calm and conversational. "Humans learned to make their world survive them. There is a difference." The hunter stared at Jake for a long moment, processing this idea. Around them, the cantina continued its business, but Jake noticed that more tables had gone quiet. More aliens were listening, even if they pretended not to be. "That is an interesting perspective," Vexthor said finally. "But evolution is evolution. Humans developed intelligence to overcome physical limitations. Many species do that." Jake nodded as if agreeing. "True, intelligence is a common adaptation. But tell me, what do you know about human history? Not the diplomatic files or the tourist brochures. The real history." The question seemed innocent enough, but something about the way Jake asked it made the remaining aliens around the table grow very still. Vexthor's scaled brow furrowed as he considered the question. "I know the basics from galactic databases. Humans developed agriculture early, built cities, eventually achieved spaceflight. Standard technological progression for an intelligent species." Jake smiled, but there was something unsettling about it now. "That is the official version, the one your databases would show. But let me tell you about the parts they leave out." The cantina around them had grown noticeably quieter. Even aliens at distant tables seemed to be straining to listen. Jake's voice remained conversational, but it carried clearly through the room. "You mentioned that Earth looks peaceful to visitors," Jake said, "and you are right. But that peaceful appearance hides something that most species never understand about humans." He leaned forward slightly, and several aliens around the table unconsciously leaned back. "Earth tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, not with acid rain or crushing gravity, but with subtlety, with patience, with methods so effective that most species never recognize them as threats." Vexthor's yellow eyes fixed on Jake's face. "What do you mean?" "Microscopic predators," Jake said simply. "Billions of them living in our water, our food, our air. Invisible creatures that invade your body and eat you from the inside. Most worlds have some parasites, but Earth perfected the art." The tentacled traitor made a disturbed sound and pushed his chair further from the table. "Weather systems that could level entire continents without warning," Jake continued. "Storms with winds that move faster than most spacecraft. Walls of water that could swallow mountains. Ice ages that lasted for thousands of years, killing everything that could not adapt quickly enough." Several aliens around the table were looking uncomfortable now. This was not the Earth they knew from the tourism advertisements. Ground that could split open and swallow cities, mountains that exploded without warning, filling the air with poison gas and burning rock, oceans that could boil and freeze in the same season. Jake's voice remained calm, almost casual as he described these horrors. But his eyes never left Vexthor's face, and through all of that, humans not only survived, we thrived. We spread to every environment on the planet, frozen wastelands where the air itself could kill you, deserts where nothing had rained for years, mountain peaks where there was barely enough oxygen to breathe. Vexthor was listening intently now, his hunter's instincts telling him that this was important information. But here's the real difference between humans and the species in your collection, Jake said. All those environmental threats were just the beginning. The thing that really made humans dangerous was that we had to compete with other humans. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the table, aliens shifted nervously. You hunt deathworlders for sport, Jake explained, his tone still friendly but somehow much more intense. But humans spent millions of years hunting each other for survival. For territory, for resources, for mates, for ideas. He gestured toward the holographic trophies still floating above the table. Every creature in your collection adapted to survive their environment. Humans adapted to survive each other. And that created something unique in the galaxy. Vexthor's clawed hands had curled into fists on the table, though he probably did not realize it. We became the only species that actively sought out conflict, Jake continued, not just for resources or territory, but to test ourselves, to become stronger, to prove we could win against any opponent. Several aliens around the table were now looking toward the exits, though none had actually left yet. Human history is not about farming in cities, Jake said. It is about 10,000 years of constant warfare. Tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. We turned conflict into an art form. The cantina had grown remarkably quiet now. Even the background music seemed muted. We invented weapons that could kill from distances your people cannot imagine. Poisons that could wipe out entire armies. Tactics that could turn a smaller force into a larger one's worst nightmare. Jake's smile never wavered, but his eyes had grown very cold. We studied our enemies so thoroughly that we could predict their actions before they made them. We learned to think like them, to understand their weaknesses, to exploit their fears. Vexthor was staring at Jake now with the intensity of a predator evaluating a threat. And when we ran out of enemies on Earth, Jake continued, we left the planet looking for new ones. Not because we needed resources or territory, but because conflict is what we do. It is what made us human. The hunter's breathing had quickened slightly, though he was trying to hide it. Every other species you have hunted became dangerous because they had to survive their world, Jake said. Humans became dangerous because we refused to just survive anything. We conquered our environment, then we left it to conquer others. Around the table, chairs were slowly being pushed back. The crowd that had gathered to hear Vexthor's stories was quietly dispersing, though they tried to make it look casual. You see, Vexthor, you have been thinking about this all wrong, Jake said, his voice still conversational but somehow much more menacing than before. You hunt deathworlders because they are dangerous prey, but humans are not prey. The last few aliens around the table found excuses to leave. Only Jake and Vexthor remained seated, staring at each other across the holographic display of trophies. We are predators, Jake said simply, the kind that other predators have nightmares about. The cantina around them continued its business, but Jake noticed that their table had become an island of empty space. No one wanted to get too close to whatever was happening between the human and the Krillian hunter. Interesting theory, Vexthor said, his voice carefully controlled. But theories and reality are different things. I have hunted real deathworlders. I know what dangerous looks like. Jake nodded as if agreeing. You are absolutely right. Theories mean nothing without proof. So let me show you something that might help you understand what I mean. He reached into his jacket pocket, and every muscle in Vexthor's body tensed, but Jake only pulled out a small datapad which he placed on the table between them. Jake touched the datapad screen and it lit up with a soft blue glow. But instead of showing whatever was on the device, he looked directly at Vexthor and began to speak. 3 days ago, you arrived at Omega Station aboard the ship Bloodhunter, Jake said, his voice still calm and conversational. You docked at Bay 17, Level 5. Your ship is a modified Krillian assault vessel, armed with plasma cannons and carrying a crew of 4. Vexthor's yellow eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. You entered the station at 1400 hours station time, Jake continued, never breaking eye contact. First you went to the customs office to register your hunting permits. Then you visited the equipment traders on level 3, looking for specialized ammunition for large game. The hunter's clawed hands were now flat on the table, his muscles visibly tense. That evening you ate at the Spiral Nebula restaurant. You ordered their house special, which is made from imported Taraxian beast meat. You complained that it was not spicy enough for Krillian taste. Around them, the cantina continued its normal business, but Jake noticed that no one was sitting at the tables immediately near them anymore. Word was spreading quietly through the room that something significant was happening. Yesterday, you spent the morning in the information markets, Jake said. You were researching potential hunting grounds in the Outer Rim territories. You seemed particularly interested in reports of dangerous creatures on Kepler 442b. Vexthor's breathing had quickened, though he was trying to control it. His hunter's instincts were screaming warnings, but he could not identify the source of the threat. Yesterday afternoon, you visited the weapons dealers. You purchased 3 thermal charges and a neural disruptor. The dealer was a Vegan named Clix who has been selling illegal weapons on this station for 6 years. The pad in Jake's hands remained untouched, its screen still glowing softly, but his eyes never left Vexthor's face as he continued his recitation. Last night you returned to your ship at 2200 hours, but first you stopped at the communications center and sent a message to someone named Rixtal on the Krillian homeworld. Based on the length of the transmission and the encryption level, I would guess it was a report to your hunting guild. Vexthor finally found his voice. How do you know all this? Jake smiled, and the expression was somehow much more frightening than any threat would have been. This morning you woke at 0600 hours station time. You performed your daily exercises on the ship for exactly 43 minutes. Then you showered, ate a meal of preserved Krillian protein bars, and checked your equipment. The hunter was staring at Jake now with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for mortal enemies. You left your ship at 0930 and went directly to level 2, where you spent 2 hours in the recreational combat arena. You fought 3 different opponents and won all 3 matches. The victories seemed to put you in a good mood. Several tables away, aliens were pretending to eat and drink while obviously listening to every word. After that, you came here to the cantina, where you have been telling stories about your hunting exploits for the past 4 hours, Jake continued. You have had 3 drinks, each one a Krillian blood wine that costs more than most species make in a week. Vexthor's clawed hands had begun to shake slightly. This is impossible. You would have had to be watching me constantly. That brings us to the really interesting part, Jake said, finally looking down at his datapad. He touched the screen and information began scrolling across it. You see, while you were busy announcing yourself to everyone on the station, I was doing what humans do best. He turned the pad so Vexthor could see it. The screen showed detailed surveillance footage, financial records, communication logs, and other data that should have been impossible for a civilian to access. I was hunting, Jake said simply. The difference is, I was not hunting for sport or trophies. I was hunting for information, for patterns, for weaknesses, for understanding. The footage on the pad showed Vexthor in various locations around the station, clearly taken from security cameras and other monitoring devices. You see, that is what humans do when we encounter something that might be a threat, Jake explained. We do not just track it or study its physical capabilities. We learn to think like it. We understand its motivations, its habits, its fears. More data scrolled across the screen. Purchase records, biometric scans, even psychological profiles based on behavioral analysis. For example, I know that you always check your weapons exactly 7 times before leaving your ship. I know that you prefer to eat alone but drink in groups. I know that you have nightmares about something with too many teeth, probably from a hunt that went wrong. Vexthor was no longer trying to hide his discomfort. His yellow eyes were wide and his breathing was rapid and shallow. I know that you send money to someone named Velta every month, probably a mate or offspring back home. I know that you have an old injury to your left shoulder that causes you pain in cold weather. The pad continued to display information that should have been private, personal, impossible to obtain. I know that your ship's engines need maintenance, but you have been putting it off because you cannot afford the repairs. I know that this hunting trip is not just for sport. but because you desperately need the prize money from successful kills. Around them, the cantina had grown very quiet. Even aliens at distant tables had stopped their conversations to listen. Most importantly, Jake said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I know that you are not nearly as confident as you pretend to be. You tell these stories and show these trophies because you are trying to convince yourself as much as everyone else. Vexthor's hands were shaking openly now. The great hunter looked like he was about to either attack or run. You want to know the difference between humans and the creatures in your collection? Jake asked, setting the pad down on the table between them. They became dangerous because they had to survive their environment. Humans became dangerous because we turned everything into our environment. He gestured around the cantina, which was now almost silent except for the background hum of the station's systems. Right now, on this neutral station, surrounded by dozens of different species, you thought you were safe, Jake said. But I have been studying you since the moment you arrived. I know more about you than your own packmates do. The datapad screen showed a final piece of information, a detailed schematic of Vexthor's ship, including security codes, weapon specifications, and crew quarters. I have identified 17 different ways to neutralize you without ever touching you, Jake said casually, using only resources available on this station. Would you like me to demonstrate? The cantina had become so quiet that the hum of the station's life support system seemed loud in comparison. Vexthor sat frozen in his chair, staring at the datapad that contained impossible amounts of information about his private life. For the first time in his long career as a hunter, he understood what it felt like to be prey. Jake reached for the pad and closed the display with a simple touch. The incriminating evidence disappeared, leaving only a blank screen and the memory of what had just been revealed. No demonstration necessary, Vexthor said, his voice barely above a whisper. I believe you. Jake nodded and slipped the pad back into his jacket. Around them, a few brave aliens were beginning to quietly leave the cantina, moving carefully as if sudden movements might attract attention. You asked about hunting deathworlders, Jake said, his tone returning to the conversational friendliness he had started with. So let me tell you the truth you missed in all your research. He finished the last of his whiskey and set the glass down gently. Humans are not feared in the galaxy because of our physical capabilities. We are not the strongest species or the fastest or the most naturally armed. Earth is not the most dangerous planet in terms of environmental hazards. Vexthor listened with the desperate attention of someone, receiving crucial survival information. We are feared because we turn survival into an art form, and then we turn that art into conquest, Jake continued. Every other species adapted to their environment and stopped there. Humans adapted to everything, everywhere, all the time. A few remaining patrons at distant tables were straining to hear, though they pretended to be focused on their drinks. The creatures in your collection became dangerous because they had to survive specific threats on specific worlds, Jake explained. Humans became dangerous because we refused to accept limitations from any source. Environmental, technological, biological, social. We treated every barrier as a problem to be solved. He gestured toward where the holographic trophies had been displayed. You hunt for trophies to prove your worth as a predator, but humans hunt to eliminate threats to our pack, and that is a very different kind of hunting. Vexthor's claws scraped against the table surface as his hands trembled. When a human identifies a threat, we do not just track it or overpower it, Jake said. We study it completely. We learn everything about it, its strengths, weaknesses, habits, motivations, fears, and desires. We understand it better than it understands itself. The hunter's yellow eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Then we do not just neutralize the immediate threat. We neutralize the entire category of threat. We make sure that nothing like it can ever threaten us again. Jake stood up slowly, his movements calm and controlled. Several aliens across the room tensed as if his change in position might signal some kind of attack. For example, he said, reaching into his jacket again. This time several beings in the cantina actually flinched, but Jake only pulled out another datapad. A different one. This contains detailed intelligence on your entire operation, he said, placing it on the table in front of Vexthor. Your hunting grounds, your methods, your contacts, your financial arrangements, even your next planned targets. The hunter stared at the device as if it might explode. It also contains similar information about every other hunter operating in this sector. Names, ship specifications, hunting patterns, everything. Vexthor looked up at Jake with growing horror. Why are you telling me this? Jake's smile was genuinely friendly now, which somehow made it more terrifying than any threat. Because you just became a threat to human shipping in this sector, he said simply. Your hunting activities have been interfering with trade routes. 3 merchant vessels have been attacked by creatures you drove off their homeworlds. 17 crew members are dead. The blood drained from Vexthor's scaled face as he realized the implications. So now you are not just a hunter anymore, Jake continued. You are a problem that needs to be solved, and humans are very good at solving problems. He turned to walk away, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, and Vexthor, that injury to your left shoulder? It was not from a hunt that went wrong. It was from a human trader named Bill Chen who you tried to intimidate 2 years ago. He broke your shoulder with a cargo hook and left you unconscious in a loading bay. The hunter's eyes went wide with recognition and fear. Bill is my cousin, Jake said casually. Family is very important to humans. We remember people who hurt our family, and we never forget. He walked toward the cantina exit, moving with the same unhurried pace he had used when approaching. But now every alien in the room watched him go with the kind of attention usually reserved for natural disasters. At the doorway, Jake stopped and looked back one final time. The difference between us, Vexthor, is that you hunt for trophies to prove your worth. Humans hunt to eliminate threats to our pack. The results look very different. As Jake disappeared into the station's corridors, Vexthor sat alone at his table, staring at the datapad that contained intelligence about his entire life's work. Around him, the cantina slowly began to return to normal, but conversations were quieter now. Everyone had heard enough to understand that something significant had just happened. The great Krillian hunter reached for his drink with a shaking hand. For 47 successful hunts, he had been the predator. He had tracked, studied, and killed creatures from the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. He had built a reputation as one of the finest hunters of his generation. But in the span of a single conversation, he had learned that somewhere in the galaxy, there was an entire species that did not just hunt individual prey. They hunted entire categories of threats. They turned hunting into a science, and they applied that science with the cold efficiency of a species that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of survival. Vexthor picked up the datapad Jake had left behind. The screen activated at his touch, displaying file after file of intelligence about hunters, their operations, their weaknesses, and their vulnerabilities. It was more information than his entire species had gathered in centuries of hunting. At the bottom of the display was a simple message. Hunting season on human shipping lanes is now closed. Find a new profession or become a trophy yourself. The hunter set down the pad and looked around the cantina. A few aliens were still watching him, but their expressions had changed. Where before they had looked at him with fear and respect, now they looked at him with something closer to pity. He had come to Omega Station as a predator, confident in his abilities and proud of his reputation. He was leaving as prey, marked by a species that had turned predation into an art form. And somewhere in the vast corridors of the station, a human was walking away, already moving on to the next problem that needed to be solved. Because that was what humans did. They identified threats, studied them completely, and then eliminated them with the kind of thoroughness that ensured the problem would never arise again. Vexthor finally understood why humans were classified as deathworlders. Despite coming from a garden planet, it was not their world that made them dangerous. It was what they had made of themselves while conquering that world, and then what they had chosen to become when they left it behind.